Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the food we eat every single day. We're going to break it all down to its most basic parts to figure out what's really fueling us. So, let's just dive right in. Okay, take a look at this. It's a gorgeous plate of food, right? Stuff we see all the time: fruits, veggies, nuts, spices. This is the heart of our kitchens, the stuff on our plates. It all looks very familiar. But here's a thought. Have you ever really stopped to wonder what all this stuff is actually made of, beyond the colors and the flavors? What really makes an avocado different from a blueberry on a chemical level? Well, it turns out all that amazing variety in our food, it all boils down to just a few key components. And once you kind of get what they are, you'll never look at your plate the same way again. So let's start with the big guys. We call them the macronutrients. They're the big three that give our bodies energy and all the materials they need to grow and repair themselves. First up, we've got proteins. The best way to think of these is as your body's own personal construction crew. They're built from smaller units called amino acids, and their main job is basically to build and fix everything. And man, are they busy. Proteins are building your muscles and skin, they're creating the enzymes and hormones that keep things running, and they're a huge part of your immune system. They're absolutely critical. Next on our list are fats. Now, I know fats can get a bad rap, but they're actually the body's most concentrated source of energy. I mean, they pack more than double the energy punch of proteins or carbs. And what's really cool is how much they actually do. It's not just about storing energy. You need fat to absorb certain vitamins, it helps insulate your body and protect your organs, and get this, it forms the outer layer of every single cell you have. And finally, we get to carbohydrates. So if proteins are the construction crew and fats are the backup generator, think of carbs as the main power line. They are the body's favorite go-to fuel for quick energy, especially for your brain. Okay, so we've met the what, proteins and fats. Now let's talk about the where. And a huge source for both of these macronutrients is food that comes from animals. You see it right here: meat, fish, milk, cheese, eggs. These foods are incredibly dense sources of what we call complete proteins. That just means they have all the essential amino acids our bodies can't make on their own. And of course, they're loaded with those vital fats. But this brings up a massive challenge, right? These foods are full of nutrients and water, which is great for us, but it also means they can spoil really, really fast. So how have we solved this problem of making them last? Well, the answer is in the science of preservation. For centuries, we've come up with some pretty ingenious ways to process food, not to make it unhealthy, but to stop it from going bad and to make it available all year long. Let's look at a couple of examples. Let's start with milk. You've got fresh milk. It's delicious, but it spoils in just a few days, and it has to stay in the fridge. Then you've got dried milk powder, which has a super long shelf life and is easy to store. The only real difference between them? Water. And the process to get there is a marvel of food science. First, they pasteurize the milk, which just means they heat it to kill off bad bacteria. Then they evaporate most of the water out to make it really concentrated. And finally, that concentrate gets sprayed into hot air and poof, the water vanishes, leaving behind a fine powder. And this just shows the transformation perfectly. You go from this perishable liquid to a totally stable, nutrient-packed powder that can be shipped all over the world and stored for months or even years. Now let's check out another classic: preserving meat. Sausages are actually one of the oldest forms of processed food. They're a really clever way to preserve every part of an animal using a very specific process. It all starts with grinding the meat. Then comes the really critical step: mixing in salt, spices, and other things that help preserve it and, add flavor. Then the mixture is stuffed into casings, and finally it gets cooked, smoked, or dried to get rid of moisture and kill bacteria. So what you can see is that all this processing gives us things like convenience, safety, and a long shelf life. But it definitely raises the big question: what's the trade-off? Are we losing out on nutrition for all that convenience? Let's go back to milk for a second. Pasteurized milk is pretty minimally processed. It keeps that fresh taste and most of its nutrients, but the downside is obvious. You gotta keep it cold and use it fast. Dried milk, on the other hand, is the king of convenience. But here's the trade-off. That high heat process can destroy some of the more delicate, heat-sensitive vitamins, and, well, the taste is definitely different from fresh milk. But just look at this comparison. When you look at the macronutrients, the protein, the fat, the carbs, they're almost identical once you add water back to the powder. So the main building blocks, they're still there.
The real differences are usually in the smaller stuff, the micronutrients, like vitamins and minerals.
And that same logic applies to something like sausages. They are an incredibly convenient and tasty source of protein. The trade-off is tied directly to how they're preserved. To make them last and taste great, a lot of salt gets added. And the saturated fat content is often higher, which helps with both flavor and shelf life. So, from the basic building blocks of our food to the complex science of how we make it last, every single thing on your plate tells a story. It's a story of chemistry, of biology, of clever engineering. So the real question is, the next time you look at your food, what story will you see?